Welcome to the MessianTics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Good morning. I wanted to welcome you to the MessianTics Podcast. We're going to do something different today. Our previous podcasts have been pretty heavy into theology and Bible and things like that, and we want to do something a little more light today. And so what we're going to do is talk about one or more, each of us will talk about one or more of the Messianic leaders that impacted our life in some way and share some of our interactions, our stories, our history with these people, and hopefully give you a little insight into some people you may have heard of or may not have heard of that may impact your life in some way. So I want to begin with, by the way, this is Rabbi Eric. I'm joined with Rabbi Jonathan, Rabbi Toby, and Rabbi David. And I want to start with Paul Wilbur. When I first became part of the Messianic movement, we've shared our stories before. You can look back at our podcast to get a little testimony of how I came from traditional Judaism to Messianic Judaism. But when I first came to Messianic Judaism and became a leader in a congregation, I went to a rabbis conference, and at the rabbis conference, Paul Wilbur was there. Now, I didn't know who Paul Wilbur was. I didn't know anything about him. It was really my first conference, and I was meeting everybody for the first time.
Wait, before you really dive into Paul, I think our audience needs to hear the story of the collar. I think they need to hear the story of the collar.
Okay, well, so this is my very first rabbis conference, and Rabbi Charlie Kluge was going to be the speaker of the first night of the conference. And so I didn't know him. I didn't know anybody. Like I said, it's my first time there. And so we have our dinner together, as they did at the rabbis conference before the message and the meeting and all that actually commenced. And then we get done with the dinner, and they call Rabbi Kluge up to speak, but they call him up as Father Charlie Kluge is going to be our main speaker today. Not Rabbi, but Father Charlie Kluge. This is back in the 80s, late 80s, when the collarless shirts were popular. You know, they had the different colored shirts, but they had no collar to them. And he was wearing a black collarless shirt, and they took a white piece of paper and hung it over the front of his collar. Now, I was brand new, and I was across the room, and all I hear is our special speaker for tonight is Father Charlie Kluge, and he starts walking up, and I see the white tab, and I look over at my wife, and I said, if he's a priest, I'm out of here. But that was my first moment in Messianic Jewish conference, Messianic Rabbis Conference. When he walked up, took the piece of paper off his collar and made a big joke about it and everything. But that was my very first welcome to the Messianic movement as a rabbi moment.
And in fairness, over the years, he's actually become one of the probably closest friends of our family. So
yeah, we love Rabbi Kluge.
Father Kluge.
Yeah, we love Rabbi Kluge, and but that was my first moment. But at this conference, Paul Wilbur was going to be leading the worship, and in my experience, I had pastored a church for a while and been involved in traveling around speaking for a number of years at that point. And in general, worship leaders in the places where I had been came and did their thing at their appointed time in the service, and then left the service and went and stood outside and sold CDs or tapes or whatever. But they really weren't active in the service. They would come to do their thing, and then they would leave to do their thing, and they didn't hang around for the service. And I saw Paul come into the service, and he led worship, and then I just expected he was going to leave to go out of the service. And he didn't. He walked down, he sat in the front, and he participated in the service and stayed there for the whole thing. And then after the service, they had a time of prayer for whoever wanted to be prayed for. And Paul got up and prayed with people after the service for hours. There were people there for at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours that were there. And it was the first time I met Paul, and I didn't actually meet him until after the service was over, but it changed and established my opinion of who Paul Wilbur was from that moment, because he wasn't Paul Wilbur, the Messianic artist or the Messianic worship guy who came, did his songs, and went out. But it was Paul Wilbur, the guy who actually worshiped the guy he said he worshiped and was there. Now, I watched as many of the rabbis and leaders and others had left the room, and Paul didn't leave until the last person that was in the room left. That's when Paul walked out. And again, this was probably 2 hours after the service was over, and the whole thing was probably a couple hours up to that point, so it was like 4 hours time that he was there. But it cemented in me a respect for him as a real worship leader, and not just an artist or a musician or somebody who was there to make his money and sell his tapes or CDs or whatever and leave. But it not only established who Paul Wilbur was in my heart as a friend and somebody that I respect, but it also changed the way I looked at worship leaders in some way, because instead of being the opening act for the message that would go out and go have lunch or whatever after they did their set, but it changed where I saw worship leaders as people who were actively involved in the service beyond just doing their part. And so that was a significant thing for me. So I appreciate it, and that's been nearly 30 years ago that event happened. Maybe, about 30 years ago. Wow. But that happened. But Paul's been a good friend and since then, and someone I respect as an artist, as a worship leader, more than an artist. So that kind of is a change, a difference. Whereas people who can do music, but are they truly worshipers and worship leaders? Are they leading people into worship or not? And that's
also with that, Paul Wilbur is also a fantastic teacher.
Yes,
I mean he really has a gift and a heart for expounding upon the Word of God in a way that's inviting.
Agreed.
So, and that came about in experience also years later, because Paul was asked to speak at one of the Messiah conferences. And when I found out he was speaking, I was like, well, this is Paul Wilbur, the worship leader. Maybe I'll go get a sandwich. It may be time to go visit the Falcon and get a sandwich or something during this portion of the service. But I stayed there because I truly do love Paul. And he gave an outstanding message that was filled with depth and meat and meaningful and all. So, But I think that comes from when you really have a heart that connects with the heart of the Lord, whether you're sharing in music or you're sharing in a message or word or whatever. It's the connection that gives you that real that we really want. So Paul's my first one that I want to share, and I hope that was a blessing. I hope it introduced you to listeners to an aspect of Paul that you may not have known if you know of him and his music, and he's actually written a couple of books now.
Also, Paul is a avid motorcycle enthusiast, so he's got a special place in my heart.
Harley Davidson.
So who wants to share their person next?
The first, it's not one person, it's actually three. It's when I was...
Wait, is it 3 and 1?
Well, it's 3 and 1. I'm not going to go through all three. Because my personal experiences with these three people have been very limited, but it's how they impacted me when I was... it's how they impacted me more through their music. My beginnings in Messianic ministry was in music. I started off as a bass player as part of the worship team at Beth Yeshua in Macon, Georgia. And I remember at least, this is 2005, late 2005. I joined the worship team in December of 2005. So 2005, early 2006. And there just wasn't a lot that I had access to. I mean, Messianic Judaism was new for me. But now listen, nowadays there's so much. I mean, I think if you look at Messianic worship music and how much is out there, it is multiplied in the past just like 16 or 17 years.
Yeah, I think McAdam just dropped a new album the other day.
I mean,
not quite. They dropped a single, but the new album's coming shortly. But
okay.
yeah.
So a friend of mine that went to the congregation in Macon, his name was David, and I haven't talked to him in a long time, but he had a big impact on my life. And he gave me, because I told him, I said, I just want anything Messianic. I'm so hungry for this stuff. And he gave me a CD. It was like a Guardians of the Galaxy awesome mix. If you've seen the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, it was like a CD mix of two artists, Barry and Batya Siegel and Marty Goetz. And those are the people I'm talking about.
I love Marty.
Yeah. So that CD I put in my car and just wore out. It was like songs from, it was Shema Yisrael, which is an album by Barry and Batya, Go Through the Gates, another album by Barry and Batya, and there was just songs from Marty like Oh Lord, Our Lord, which is based on Psalm 8, and it was all I had. And I just listened to it over and over and over, and it impacted me because it just gave me a place to go that, it was like all I had, because there was just not a lot out there, and I didn't have access to it, or I didn't know where to get it. And I was able to eventually meet Barry and Batya, and they're absolutely wonderful. And anytime they take the stage, they're just it's like, I don't know, it's like a king and queen, of Messianic music getting up there. They have such grace and dignity when they get up on stage, and they do worship together. It's so sweet. And I had an opportunity to talk to them both backstage at Messiah Conference 2012 and tell them, like, you guys had such an impact on me. And, I only talked to them for a few minutes, but they were really gracious. And Marty, I've had a couple more, a little bit more experience with. He led the worship track at the summit, the YMJ, the MJ, Eish HaRuach Summit, and he led a worship track, and he's just so gracious and he's incredibly humble and is very sweet. Like, the spirit you get from listening to his music is what you get when you meet him personally, and I was able to kind of learn from him for a few days and got some great teaching. And then there was a recent conference we were at that he was playing at, and I was actually helping Rabbi David with the backstage operations. And I had an opportunity to just simply move speakers around for him while he was getting ready to play. And this was just this past summer. And I just felt like, wow, what full circle. I just was honored just to move speakers for the guy that had, and he had no idea. And I've never really told him that, that he had such an impact on me as a new Messianic, not a new believer, but a new Messianic believer, entering the Messianic movement as my calling. He had such an impact on me and really just, kept me so encouraged and kept me into the movement. I was going to services on Shabbat, but during the week I was listening to Barry and Batya and Marty, and getting just to move his speakers around for him was like, wow, I get to just now I get to help the guy get ready for a worship set. I remember he was just a voice on a CD and was just ministering to me. So definitely in my first foray into Messianic ministry, being a worship leader, Barry and Batya Siegel and Marty Goetz were huge impacts on me.
Yeah, if I can jump back in, there was one thing about Paul Wilbur that I wanted to say that I left out that my Rabbi David reminded me earlier, is when my mom became a believer shortly before she went to be with the Lord, or at least outwardly proclaimed she was a believer in public to my brothers and my sister and family that she accepted Yeshua as her Messiah, and it was a very powerful moment. But when we looked through her car, after she passed, cleaning out her car, we found that all of the discs in her CD player were Paul Wilbur CDs, except for one Barbra Streisand CD that was in there. But she had been listening to his music for who knows how long before she publicly admitted that she had become a believer. So Paul not only impacted my life as a Messianic rabbi and leader, but had a great impact on my mom's life as she journeyed on her walk to faith in the Messiah of Israel as a Jewish believer. So I wanted to share that real quick. Jonathan?
So the person who's had a lot of impact in my life is a Messianic teacher by the name of Gabriel Rutledge. He's the his formal title is the teaching elder of Dothan Messianic Fellowship, which is a Dothan congregation, Messianic congregation in Dothan, Alabama. And he was him and his wife had been committed to leading and teaching and ministering in that community since I think summer of 2018. They were there before that, but they had moved away for some family stuff. But they'd been there since the summer of 2018. And I had moved back to Alabama from college in 2018, and I hadn't started attending yet. But so they were already there, getting having the ground laid, as they were the leaders of the teaching leaders of that community. And then I showed up, in February of 2019, a few months down the road, and they were just, first off, they're just so kind, and humble. Like, he's not, Gabe would strangle me, if I called him a rabbi. It's just not his forte. He has his, and he always asks people, you meet him, he's like, just call me Gabe, and that's his, thing. And they were just so open. And I was this young single 20-something at the time, and just kind of was figuring out my footsteps in the Messianic movement and what it meant to be a Messianic believer. And they invited me into their home. They asked me, hey, you want to come, celebrate Shabbat with our family, and I lived about 45 minutes away. So they're like, yeah, you can crash on our couch, and we just come to service, the next morning. And so I was like, sure, absolutely. That'd be great. And, so I started spending, it got to the point where I was at their house pretty much every Friday, just about every Friday evening, celebrating Shabbat with them and their boys. It was we were actually out on a walkway behind their house. They have a nature walk behind their house. People ride bikes on it, and it's laid over this creek. So it's really in the mornings it's really quiet, and got the trickle of water running, and it's just really peaceful. And it was out there actually that Gabe told me one day, we were just having coffee walking, and he's like, I think you have the gift of teaching. I'd like to draw that out of you. And so we sort of, made this commitment that, with this discipleship commitment, that I would learn, I would, sit at his feet, and he would, teach me and give me opportunity to teach and to grow in understanding what that meant. And so he started to give me opportunities. He'd be like, hey, I want you to speak this Shabbat, so if you'll, I think the very first thing I ever did was, I was a history guy, and he was like, I want you to do a 10-15 minute segment on who Marcion was and what is Marcionism. It had to do with the subject of that Shabbat. And so I said, okay. So that was the first thing I did. And then, every, month or so, just about, he would, give me opportunity to teach and to prepare a message, a sermon, a teaching on the Torah Parsha or a topical lesson. And we really just spent a lot of time mentoring me, really talking to me, and I would have questions, and we just talked an awful lot. And him and his wife both poured a lot into me, and just got me to the point to where I am even today. And they just had a really big influence on my life, not just as mentors and teachers, but as as a friend. He had opened up his home and food, and that's at that point in life, that's really what I needed. I really did need friendship, because the only other people around me were my coworkers, and none of them were really living for the Lord. So it was kind of difficult to find people. It's nice to be able to be a testimony and a witness to people, but if you're the only testimony and witness around, then it's kind of difficult to be. So yeah, Gabe and them really played a big influence in my life, just teaching me and directing me, discipling me, kind of guiding me to be a little more, I think, he really helped in talking me down, because I was in the kind of that very overly zealous,
right? Yeah, I know that
point in
feeling.
life. Yeah, and zealous, zeal is not always righteous. We often think of zeal as being the thing that if you're zealous, it's no.
Without knowledge, it's bad.
Without knowledge, without wisdom, without direction, zeal can be very bad and very unhealthy.
I went through that.
And so he really kind of talked me down from a lot of different things. he was like, no, you don't need to argue with everyone on Facebook. Like, that's just a waste of time. No, you don't need to spend a lot of time dedicated to conspiracy theories and, fringe, beliefs and ways of looking at things.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, I know. It's sad. But it was very wise because I was very young. I was brand new to the movement. I was very impressionable. And so he really helped me to steer clear of a lot of the different traps that a lot of people who come into the Messianic movement often fall into. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things that my wife tells me all the time. She's so thankful that the first place she ever came to regarding as a Messianic congregation was Bredam, because Bredam, is very sound. It's not out on the wild fringes of the wild west of different Messianic crazy thought. And so it's she's so thankful for that. And because I think of my story was like how close I came to like being on that precipice of I could be into all sorts of crazy stuff and completely unguided, having no direction, but I'm thankful that God brought me to Gabe and to his family and to the community there in Dothan for helping me to kind of be in a good place, a place that's directed by God's word, by God's spirit, by wisdom. Right. So I'm really thankful to them, and still we're still good friends. We still talk often, and I just love them dearly.
So for me, one of the most influential people, and Pops, you're going to have to just get over this one, but for me, one of the most influential people in both my life and mine and my wife's life, and in our kind of development and direction in ministry within the Messianic Jewish community is actually the rabbi that we served under in New York for 5 years as rabbinic intern while I was going to school at Naya College, and that was Rabbi David Rosenberg of Shuvah Yisrael in Long Island. Still by far, like, my wife and I both consider him and his wife our spiritual parents, my dad's a rabbi, obviously, and my father-in-law is a rabbi, and so kind of growing up in Messianic Judaism, those were our rabbis, right? My dad was our rabbi growing up, and then when we got involved in congregational ministry and life, I worked with my dad some in planting congregations. I helped my father-in-law lead his congregation for a couple of years before we moved to New York, but it was always like our kind of example or who we were learning from and gleaning from was pretty much kind of a small pool at that point. It was our dad's, and when we moved to New York and started going to Shuvah Yisrael and started working with Rabbi David Rosenberg, it really opened up a lot of things for us. One is it kind of forced us, because we literally moved cross country, it kind of forced us to learn how to like fend for ourselves and figure out how to make life work on our own. But aside from that, it put us under the leadership of a different rabbi that wasn't related to us. That I was telling Rabbi Toby yesterday at the office. He was asking me, "Hey, how did you learn Hebrew?" I was like, "Well, it began with me getting kicked out of 6 of my dad's Hebrew classes that he taught." But the reality is that moving to New York and working with Rabbi David really helped develop our ministry style, who we are, how we approach congregational life, even down to the structure. Like, we just introduced a new service structure at CMC, even down to the service structure of our congregation and things like that. But also, Rabbi David Rosenberg is who I trained under as to become a rabbi. He fought in my corner for ordination multiple times when I was dealing with all kinds of crazy stuff with regards to getting ordained by our rabbinic organization. And he influenced, and still today, we're talking, this was 2004 that we moved to New York, and we were there from 04 to 09, and it's now 2022, and he still is influential in my own personal discipleship. He developed a Bible reading plan for daily devotional and discipleship decades ago when he first became a believer, because he realized pretty quick, and I'll steal his story, but he realized pretty quick that most believers don't actually spend any real time in the Word of God on any kind of a daily basis. And so when he first became a believer, he was like an adamant consumer of the Word, and he would spend ridiculous amounts of time in the Word every day. And he went to his pastor that led him to the Lord, and he says, "Hey, I just don't feel like I'm spending enough time in the Word. How much time do you spend? Because it's got to be a lot. You're preparing sermons, and he was like, yeah, I spend a good bit. He goes, well, how much do you spend? And he goes, oh, I spend about 10, 15 minutes a day. And Rabbi David looks at him and goes, you what? And he goes, well, how much do you spend? He goes, I'm spending 3-4 hours a day, and I don't feel like I'm getting enough. Like, I feel like I need to invest more. I don't know how to do it. I got to work. I got to feed my family. But he developed a reading plan called The Word is a Way of Life that I use daily. And if you follow my personal social media, you'll see I post about it almost every single day. But Word is a Way of Life is a Bible reading plan that I use daily that has me reading the Bible 3 to 4 times a year on average, cover to cover. And I've been using it for probably close to almost 20 years now. I guess I started in 2004, and I'm still using it. I mean, there have been periods where there were weaning and waning and what have you, but for the most part, I still use it, and it's very influential in my life. And I've led others to using Word as a Way of Life and things like that. He helped develop a lot of my construct and concept of Messianic Jewish life and ministry and things like that. And so I still consider him my rabbi today, and I regularly will reach out to him. I just had the opportunity to, through a scenario, circumstance in our congregation was a little painful, I had an opportunity to reach out to him and seek guidance yet again, which is a pretty regular thing. I'll call him for guidance and counsel and what have you. I also call my dad and others, and there's a handful of rabbis particularly that I reach out to on a regular basis, but David Rosenberg's probably one of the first ones. As a matter of fact, he was one of the most influential people in helping me develop as a preacher, as somebody preaching on the Word of God, because he helped me learn pretty quick what worked and what didn't work with the way that I communicate. And I'll never forget the first few times I spoke at Shuvah that he would sit down and goes, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try a different way. Okay, that one didn't work either. And finally, he was like, okay, this is your thing. You're going to do this from now on. This is your thing. But he's still a very, very dear friend of our family's. And I know he's been, as a matter of fact, we started going to Shuvah when we moved to New York because he and my father were really good friends already.
Right. So we've talked about Paul Wilbur. We've talked about Marty Getz. And we've talked about Barry and Batya Segal. We've talked about Gabe Rutledge, who many people may not know who he is, but I encourage you to connect with Gabe Rutledge and Dothan Messianic Fellowship. We talked about Dave Rosenberg, and those were all people who positively influenced our life. I want to talk about a second one, but this is different in way because I talked about Paul and how he did something that really affected me in a positive way, and it was something that was positive in my eyes. I want to talk about somebody who positively influenced my life, although, and he's a Messianic leader, although if people just watched us interact, they would think we didn't like each other possibly, or at least didn't, and that's Stuart Dowerman. Dr. Stuart Dowerman, he was part of Jews for Jesus many years ago. He led a congregation in California for a number of years. He's written a number of things. He's active on social media. But there's so many things we disagree about in just our personal views of things. However, he's somebody that I desire to have in my life because he's somebody that forces me to look at things in ways I may not have considered. And having people around you that agree with everything that you say, everything you do, everything you believe, I think is unhealthy. I think that we need to have people in our lives that challenge our beliefs, that force us to look at other perspectives, that not necessarily are we going to agree with them at the end of our cycle, but we'll be able to defend our position, to know why we believe. Too many people believe things just because they were told that's what they should believe, and they don't actually flesh out and dig into and build foundations. And so I love Stuart. We don't agree on everything. We believe that we both agree Yeshua is the Messiah. We believe in the promises of God to the Jewish people, the nation Israel, that are irrevocable. We believe in a lot of things that we agree on. So I don't want people to think we don't agree on anything, but there's a number of things that we come from different perspectives. But I appreciate him greatly because he's somebody that will communicate with me, will challenge me, will push me in ways that other people don't. For whatever reason, people don't want to engage in a real pill pull, a real debate, a real opportunity to push back and forth, and iron sharpening iron and going through things. So when people ask me who in the Messianic movement influenced my life the greatest, one is Paul Wilbur, which I already said, and the other is Stuart Dowerman. And again, it doesn't mean that we agree on everything. We can be friends and love one another, and he's overcoming a stroke right now, and I'm praying for him all the time, and I love him regardless of whether we agree on everything, but I love him and I appreciate him, and he has influenced my life because we don't fit in the same drawer all the time, because we don't see everything eye to eye, because our thoughts are different on things, and we view things from different directions. But I am so grateful to have him in my life, and that he stays in my life, because it does cause me to view things in different ways, to challenge my notions and preconceived positions, to force me to be able to stand up upon what I believe and know that I'm secure in what I believe. And he's caused me at times to change what I believed and form a new place that I stand to defend that position from. So again, my two for today were Paul Wilbur and then Stuart Dowerman, for different reasons, but both people who steadied me in things. My opinion of worship leaders was fundamentally changed by Paul Wilbur and how he acts, and my belief in many other things have shifted and been strengthened, depending on by Dr. Stuart Dowerman, Rabbi Stuart Dowerman, and our involvement together over the years. So if people ask me the two most influential people in my life as a Messianic, there's many others. I mean, I know lots and lots of Messianic leaders, but those are two that jump to the top of the pile of people who influenced my life as a Messianic rabbi and a leader and a believer.
Yeah, that's why people are just sometimes afraid to leave that echo chamber they find themselves in. It's why, like, over the years, I can't tell you how many Facebook groups and messaging groups I've left, because it just became an echo chamber. Everyone agreed. Everyone was kind of the same, direction, doing the same things. I was like, I'm not really, like, this isn't, I mean, I'm in enough of that on my own in real life. So why do I need to add, 2 other groups, 3 other groups, 4 other groups on Facebook to be part of, when I should be in groups that are going to challenge me to think differently, challenge me to, address a perspective, because a lot of times what you'll realize, especially in the Messianic world, because again, like the subtitle of our podcast, 2 Jews, 4 opinions, you'll find yourself in the midst of multiple, you're looking at the same coin, but sometimes you're looking at it from a different side, and you're not, unless you have people who are willing to engage you to draw you out, from that side and look around the curve and see, hey, look at this from the other perspective, you really aren't going to grow as much. And that's why I have friends, and I keep friends, and I try very hard to keep my friends who do see things very differently, because I'm like, it's like, in Pirkei Avot, where you can learn something from everyone. And I, intend to always learn something from them, not just as a practical thing, but I really do, like, we've shared a friendship and I want to remain friends. And so, and I've walked away from conversations and phone calls, like, in tears. Like I cry when I get angry. Like, that's just my, like, I get frustrated, and my body's like, we're done with this. We're just going to emote everything we can. And so, and I've had tears over the disagreements but then we've always come back and, apologize if we've said the wrong things, but always like, and then, I've even said them afterwards, be like, I will try my best to look at this from a different perspective and to see it how you see it, because I want to engage with this from not just my own perspective, because my own perspective is limited, and so I have to leave echo chambers. So I encourage you, find people to help you leave echo chambers.
I just I know we're getting low on time. I just and I hate to rattle off names left and right. I'm not going to just rattle off names, but I'll be very brief. But I have to talk about mine and my wife Brooke's spiritual parents, who we consider our spiritual parents, and that's Rabbi Ira Brower and his wife Gloria, who we've known since 2009, whom we met at the time they were holding a 10-day discipleship training intensive in Boca Raton, Florida, which they're at Etz Chaim, Rabbi Ira and Gloria. And it was 10 days. Listen, it's not one of those, like, go to a summer retreat and go to the beach and have fun. It wasn't like that. It was fun sometimes, but sometimes it wasn't, in the sense that it was not, this was a 10-day discipleship intensive. It was real discipleship. Yeah. It was not just, hey, let's have fun. It was, let's get down to what it's like to hear from God, to have a relationship with Him, to deal with pain and issues in our lives. And Rabbi Ira and Gloria, they have many spiritual children, because their heart is for the younger generations, and I can't, and I'm proud to be numbered, my wife and I, numbered among some of their spiritual children, to be a jewel in their crown,
Yeah.
And they continually stay in touch with us. Over the years, it's been 12, 13 years, and they still reach out to us and check on us. And I have to honor them as two people who have been instrumental in my wife and I's really coming together as a couple, even because we were both, at the time we weren't married, we were praying about each other, and they both knew that, and they prayed with us, so I'll never forget them. I want to just briefly mention the two rabbis that discipled me when I joined the Messianic movement, Rabbi Greg Hirschberg in Beth Yeshua in Macon, Georgia. He was my first rabbi. He installed me in leadership, took a chance on me. He taught me how to stand up for myself. He taught me how to hear from God as well. Rabbi Jude Caracello, who's in Melbourne, Florida, Kol Mashiach, he was in Savannah at the time. I served under him as a worship leader and as a youth leader. And he was the first one that really gave that he, it's a big deal when a rabbi goes out of town or does something and leaves their congregation under the leadership of someone. And I led 1 week of services, and I gave a message, and he also would allow me to give drashes. Yeah. And that was the first time I started to realize that I may have a calling in rabbinic ministry. And I have to also honor and credit Rabbi Jude for just his integrity. He was one of these guys that, if doing the right thing is the end of me, so be it.
Yeah.
And I just want to also just mention Jan Rosenberg, Rabbi Jan from New Jersey, who honestly broke a major chain in my life, which was feeling second class as a Messianic Gentile in a Jewish in a Jewish movement. When he told me, he goes, "The Jewish people are chosen. Non-Jews who come into this movement choose to be chosen. We're both chosen. So let it go." Yeah. So I just want to, I wanted to mention them, and I want to thank God and for putting people in my life who have guided me to this day.
And Rabbi Jan is Rabbi David Rosenberg's brother. They kind of work side by side, one in Long Island, New York, the other in New Jersey. So it's kind of interesting seeing their ministries develop and what all they're doing. And then I'm going to throw one more name out, because in terms of, and I think perhaps this is somebody that maybe outside of the Midwest, not a lot of people are hugely familiar with, but somebody that has such a phenomenal heart, not just in terms of ministry, but in terms of raising up new leaders and sowing into people's lives, and the wisdom and counsel that he has and is willing to share and sow into people's lives. And that's Rabbi Michael Wygant of Rosh Pina in OKC in Oklahoma City, who was actually in our rabbinic organization, we have kind of people that we have to report to, if you would, on a regular basis through our ordination process, and keep up to date with where we are and so on. And I was very much blessed to have Rabbi Michael Wygant as that individual for me during my process. And he was very hands-on, not like, all up in my business, but he was actually invested in my life, in my ministry, and the stuff we went through, some pretty rough scenarios in ministry under a different rabbi at that point in time that was difficult as we were trying to process through and figure out kind of what was next for us, and he really helped a lot with that. But he was very involved, very encouraging, and still to this day, anytime we get a chance to talk or to see each other, he makes it a point, and we make a point together to set aside a time to spend together and just catch up and see how each other's doing. And I call him, he's one of those that I said earlier that I call on a regular basis when I have some sort of an issue I got to figure out, or how would you respond to this scenario? I got so-and-so who's doing something crazy. What would you do here? I'm trying to gauge how like volatile my response should be. Can you help me kind of mellow this down a little bit?
On a scale from 1 to 10, what nuclear weapon should I use?
Yeah.
So these are just a handful of names, and I'm sure that if we spent, we're pushing 40 minutes here. I'm sure if we spent another hour, we wouldn't even scratch the surface.
Yeah, we haven't talked about people like Jonathan Bernis, or Eric Carlson, Michael Wolff, the Chernoffs, people that have impacted the Messianic movement, and I'm sure in future episodes we'll hit some of those as we go through. But we wanted to do this episode just a little more light but meaningful, something that may touch you, it may introduce you to some people that you weren't aware of, that you might want to follow and check out, and look up their websites, look up their books, their things that they've done, and get to know them, and just give honor where honor's due.
Yes. Yeah.
To people that impacted our lives and our hearts.
And I just want to say, Rabbi Eric, the beauty of being discipled also by a rabbi is you really do see that they're people just like us, that have struggles in life, and I just, that was one of the things that helped me to realize my calling, was just seeing the fact that they're just regular guys that are trying to do this thing just like I am,
Yeah.
And I was just,
trying to live a life for the Lord without blowing everything up around them.
Right. Yeah.
I do want to throw out one thing. In a previous episode, we took a minute at the end of the podcast episode to talk about some of the books that have impacted us the most over the years. And I just want to throw this out real quick for our listeners who may not know, because we've got a pretty growing audience thus far, and I've looked through on our social media pages, I've looked through some of the people that are liking and following our pages, and I don't know most of them. I know some of them, but I don't know most of them. And so you guys may not really know us all that well. And if you don't, I encourage you to go back and listen to the first episode if you haven't already, where we kind of give some of our story, which Rabbi Eric was alluding to earlier. But I just wanted to say real quick that Rabbi Eric has actually written a plethora of books, everything from commentaries on Pauline letters and such to leadership development and within the Messianic community and things like this. And I don't remember exactly how many you've written at this point, so I'll let you throw that out there and where people can find your stuff. 14
that are written right now. I've got 3 more that'll be out hopefully by December, and you can just go to rabbierict.com and find those. Also want to throw back to Rabbi David, that he's written a book on Ephesians. He's written a book about the Holy Spirit and how we interact with that, and also a book on Timothy,
which is your newest one, I believe.
Which is the latest one. So,
I'll have one coming out sometime next year. I'm thinking probably towards the summer, late summer, on some of the topics we covered early in our early episodes, but in particular on Jew and Gentile as one.
Yeah. And they can find them on Amazon. And so just
search for Rabbi David Tokajer on Amazon, or just David Tokajer on Amazon. And you'll find them. And then you can follow our Facebook page for the podcast, and we try to tag our author pages in post as well, so you can find our author pages to access those as well.
And real quick, just 2 more ad things just to throw out. One is that Rabbi David and I will be leading a trip to Israel in February, and we'd love for you to come and be part of that. You can find information about that on our Facebook pages and such. Also, I'll get Rabbi David to post a link on the podcast about that. And I want to invite you to come be in Pensacola next April at the Messianic Men's Conference. If you're a man and you'd like to hang out with some other men and build relationships and strengthen one another, Rabbi Eric Carlson will be the main speaker. Also, Ibar
Zuchkin
will be the one of the speakers, and also Dr. William Lyle, the pro-life doc, will be there, as well as Jacob Trombino will be leading the worship. A great group of men for a weekend. And this year at the men's conference, we're stepping it up. There's going to be an axe throwing contest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we'll be iron sharpening iron and throwing iron.
The weapon or the biblical book?
The actual weapon.
The actual weapons, yeah.
We're not going to be throwing our Bibles at each other. We're also not going to be throwing axes at each other, but we will be throwing axes. So we encourage you to be there. And again, the link for that will be on the podcast also.
Yeah, and that'll be April 21st through 23rd of next year. And before we go, real quick, if I can, I didn't think I'd get away with it earlier, but I'm going to quickly. I wanted to thank you for your mentoring and training for me. Rabbi Eric, sorry. Rabbi Eric would be the second person that I would mention as being the most influential in my life, because he took me on, and we met and we got to know each other, and we prayed and discussed, and I even talked with Gabe about leaving Dothan and coming to Bradam to disciple under Rabbi Eric, to become a rabbi, Messianic rabbi, and got brought over here, and Rabbi Eric's been pouring into me and discipling me and training me, and not just Bible, like it's Bible and life, and how to have fun, and also how to avoid pitfalls. I think it was just the other day I was talking about how I keep seeming to run out of time for things, to even deal with my house. Like my lawn hasn't been cut in a month, and it's looking boogerish. But it's
a good thing it's been dry recently.
It's a good thing it's been dry. So, but I told him, but he told me, he's like, well, look, you're just going to have to learn how to say no to things. You have to learn to say, I can't show up to every volunteer opportunity that Bradam puts out. And I was like, yeah, that's just me being young, I think. So I want to thank you, Rabbi Eric, for that. And you definitely have been another very influential individual in my life.
Okay, we're going to wrap up. I want to remind you one more time that if you have a comment or a question, you can comment on our Facebook page. Also, if you have a topic you'd like for us to dig into in a future episode, you can let us know that way. Also, we look forward to sharing with you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.